We are now on the top of Chav Daled Amud Beis. Yeser Mikan. I have a bigger chiddush, says the Mishnah. Hoylo shtei noshim u'shmei Masechet shavos. He's married to two women. Both have the names Leah ben Yaakov, a different Leah, who has a different father who happens to have the same name, Yaakov. So this man married two women who have the exact same name. A little bit strange, if you ask me. Imagine when he calls out Leah and two women turn around. A little bit tricky. Kosav legarshes hagedola. The word gedola here is not to be taken literally. The Mishnah is just giving you an example. He had in mind to divorce Leah the first. Now he wants to decide to use this get for Leah the second. He can't do so. The get was written based on the Tzivya Baal for Leah the first. Again, the get was written Lishma. It was written for the sake of this Baal. And not only that, it was written with the names that he commanded them to write. And it's exactly the same get that he now wants to use for the Ketana, but it wasn't written for the Ketana. Also, yes, we can an even greater Chiddush. The Baal says to the Sofik, Sov li'ezer sheretz agarish. You know what? Two wives, it's too much for me. I got to, tighten my belt over here. I got to skinny out. I got to go on a diet. Like one wife is enough. And that's what my claim is. One wife is enough. But he hasn't yet decided which of his two wives he's going to divorce. This is a sugya breira. Can he decide later, after the get was written, and the Sofer writes it, stam, for one of his two wives, and then he's going to decide which of his two wives? The Mishnah says it's possible, it's not lishma. And that's called ein breira. Mar says, Kosav l'garshes ish tov nimlach. What happens over here? The man decides to divorce his wife, and then he changes his mind. And if the Sofer wrote a get, and it was written for so-and-so, we'll call him Ruvain the first, and then Ruvain the first decides that he's not going to divorce his wife. Now Shimon picks up the get, and he wants to give it to his wife. He has the same names. So the Gemara asks, if that's the case, then the Reisha says that a man passed through the shuk, overhears the Sofer reading out loud his name and his wife's name. He cannot use the get because it wasn't written lishma. Is b'mai. If the Sofer had written the get b'shvil on behalf of this particular Baal, and then he changed his mind, and the get is possible, why did Mishnah have to go back and tell me that if the get was written by a Sofer in order to teach his Talmidim, and now the Baal overhears that he wants to use the get, it's possible it wasn't written Lishma. So what's the difference here between the case where it was written for the Baal, and then he changed his mind, and then another Baal picks up the get, and the case where it's written Stam for purposes of teaching the Talmidim? In both cases, it wasn't written for this particular Baal. Amrav Papa, Besofer Masuyim L'Slamed Askinon, Amrav Ashi, Dekonami Diktoni, Sofer Makrim, Loktoni, Sofer Korim. So the word Makrim means that he is raising his voice so that the Talmidim will hear. And the Gemara asks, my Yeser Mikan. All right, wonderful. It was written L'Slamed. But what's the Yeser Mikan? If it's not Lishma, and if it's possible, so I understand that if it was written for one Baal and the second Baal wants to pick up this get, it's not Lishma and it's possible. So what's the Yeser Mikan? And now the Gemara is going to quote a brisa of Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel that goes through every case of our Mishnah, breaks down our Mishnah into segments, and explains why each case is more of a chiddush than the one that came before it. Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, lo zeh get shenichtav shelo l'shum gerushin. Not only in the case of a person who hears the kol sofrin, where the get was only written for purposes of learning how to write a get, so there's no lishma at all. The get was written for gerushin. It was an active get. However, it was written for Ruvain the first and not for Ruvain the second. Possible. The reason why it's possible is not because it wasn't written for gerushin, it was written for experience and learning. It was written l'shem gerushin. So there's a l'shem gerushin here, but not gerushin didei, not for gerushin of the second Ruvain. And now, yes, I'm going to tell you even a bigger chiddush. In the third case in the Mishnah, the get was written for the purpose of this particular Ruvain and this particular Leah. But why is it possible? Because he has two women. He wanted to divorce Leah the first, and now he wants to change his mind and use it for Leah the second. And now we get to the next Yeser Mikah. The lo, not only that, shelo nichtav l'shum gerushin daha. It wasn't written on behalf of the gerushin of this Leah that he is divorcing, but rather the other Leah. El afilu af zeh shenichtav l'shum gerushin. Even though it was written for the gerushin of this particular woman, but it wasn't clarified then, it's only brera later, nevertheless it's possible, my timer. And what's the source for all these different psulim? And the Gemara is going to go through one pasuk and one yalfusa after the other to derive all these cases, one on top of the other, of a psul of shalol lishma. The Gemara says the following. Ikosav v'nosan sefer krisus biyada. The Torah says v'kosav la sefer krisus v'nosan biyada. If it would have said v'nosan b'sefer krisus biyada without the word v'nosan, havamina l'me'utei hech kama. We would only exclude the first case, which was written kidei lislamed, v'lo avid l'shum krisus. Aval kosav l'garish es ishto v'nimlach. If the get was written l'shem what? Not lislamed, but l'shem gerushin. However, it's written on behalf of Leah, who's married to Ruvain, but not this Ruvain and this Leah. The Ovid l'shum kri, so it has the kiyum of v'kasav la sefer krisus, and it is a sefer krisus. A makasha kasav rachmana v'kasav. Now we have the extra word v'kasav. And that's teaching me that the Baal has to write the get. And in this case, the get was written for that Baal and not for this Baal. So that's not a fulfillment of the Kasav. The E Kasav Rahman of Kasav, if we only had the Pasuk the Kasav, Hama Mina Lemutei Hai, the Lo Iu Ka Kasav Lo, right? It's not this Baal that wrote the get, it was a different Baal, meaning it was written for a different Baal. Avol, but in the third case, yesh lo shtei nashim. The iu kokasev law, it was written for the sake of this Baal, but not for the sake of this Isha. He has two wives with the same name. Ema kasha, it should be kasha, it's for kasav. And therefore, kasrachman Allah, the Torah adds the word la, lishma, meaning for this woman. And he wrote it for one wife with that name, and not for the second wife who has the same name, and therefore he can't use the get to divorce the second wife. Seifo Lomali. Why do we need the last case in the Mishnah where he didn't even decide which wife he's going to divorce? It's not law. Once we have this yalfusa of law, we should conclude that in the case where he is undecided about which woman he's writing the get for, then it's not law. A mashma law, and there's a chiddush of ein breira. We could have said that yesh breira, which means that he definitely wants to divorce one of these two women, and now misbar l'mafreya, that from the get-go, the get was written for this woman that he actually is deciding to divorce. And therefore the Mishnah wants to be machadish that lesla and brera, we don't have brera. The get is possible because it wasn't written lishma. The Mishnah says, Kosav l'garish l'sagadola lo yigarish posakatana. Now listen carefully to the words of the Mishnah. He cannot use this get to divorce the katana because he had in mind to write the get for the sake of the gedola. But can he use the get on this for the sake of the gedola? Obviously, yes. The implication of the Mishnah is that if he has two wives with the same name, he can designate in his mind that this get is going to be written to one particular wife. But guess what? When she takes out this get and shows the get, there's no indication that it was given to her. Maybe it was given to her Sarah, who has the same name. Tanu delo motzi megarish lo gedola motzi lakvam aravas also meres shnei Yosef ben Shimon adorim vir achas motziin shtarchov al acherim. Rava says that even if you have two people with the same name, the shtar is still valid. And not only in the case of Gerushin, which by implication the Mishnah is saying the get is valid for that woman that he intended to, even though there's another woman that he's married to who has the same identical name, we can jump now to the conclusion about what we call shtari mama. So the malva produces a shtar against the lova, says Rava, the shtar against the lova is valid, even though the lova is holding on to a shtar, and there are other two people out there in that city that have the same identical name. So there's Yosef ben Shimon the first and Yosef ben Shimon the second. Now Yosef ben Shimon the first produces the shtar against the lova, and it's not muchach mitocho. We can't prove a thing from this shtar because there's another Yosef ben Shimon with the same name in the city. Comes along Rava and he derives from our Mishnah that the malva has a valid shtar against Yosef ben Shimon, even though there's another Yosef ben Shimon in the city. So to this woman who comes to get married and she has a get in her hands and she wants to prove that she was divorced, we're not going to say that maybe the get was written for another woman that he's married to that has the same identical name. And this, I believe, is a reflection of the principle called tfisas bala shtar, that when a person is holding on to a shtar, he can now deflect any argument against the shtar. The malva could say to the lova, you are the one who took the money, and even though the lova is claiming, no, it was another person who took your money and he has the same name as me, but the bala shtar, that's the malva who's holding on to the shtar, is believed to testify that it's this Yosef ben Shimon and not someone else. And in the case of a get, when she's holding on to the get, she has a right to say it was given for me and written and given for me and not for my Sarah, who has the same name. Rava, if you're correct, then what do we do with the Reisha? What was the second case in the Reisha? The Ktani, it says that a man wrote a get to his wife, and then he decided that he doesn't want to divorce her, and somebody in the city who has the same name, he and his wife, and then he picks up the get, Shmi Kishimcha, Pasal Agarishba. Let's be medayik the following deal. Sheni Hudalo Matzi Megarishba, Harishon Matzi Megarishba. The first guy can be Megarisha, even though there's a second person in the city that has the same pair of names. So what's Abai's kasha? Well, I'm reading the Gemara says at the end of Masechet Bava Basra, V'lo acher yochel lahotzi aleim shtar chov. In a case of Shnei Yosef ben Shimon Shagarim Birachas, two people in the same city have the same identical names, then they could use that shtar kineged acherim, but acherim can't use that shtar against them, because each one could say that it wasn't he who borrowed the money, it was the second Yosef ben Shimon. Here too, the Baal could claim that he didn't write the get for this wife. that it wasn't he who wrote the get, Ela Yosef ben Shimon Acher wrote this get. It was another Yosef ben Shimon who had the get written for himself. So how do you survive this challenge? I mean, the Eidei Chasima are not going to clarify which Yosef ben Shimon has the get and was written for him. It's got to be Eidei Mesira, that there were Eidim who saw the get being handed down, handed from the Baal to the Isha. But wait a minute, that means Eidei Mesira Karsa. Is Rabbi Elazar here? Only Rabbi Elazar holds Eidei Mesira Karsa. So if that be the case, the Chasimas Eidim, according to Rabbi Elazar, is meaningless on a deraisa level. Is Hachanami here too? In the third case of our Mishnah, where he had in mind to divorce the Gedolah, and he changed his mind, but we Medayik, Rav was like that he can't give the get to the Gedolah because that was the original intention, is then we're going to tell you it's a case of Eidei Mesira, and it's going according to Rabbi Elazar. But if he didn't give the get in front of two Eidim, then we have to be Choshesh. Maybe this get was in the hands of another wife. She dropped it, and this second wife is the one who found the get. There's no proof from the get, if there's no Eidei Mesira, that this get was written for her and not for her tzara. So you can't prove from this that Shnei Yosef ben Shimon and Dor Bir Achas Motziim Shtar Chov Ze'el Zeh. Now the Gemara goes on to present a machlokas amoroim between Rav and Shmuel about certain cases of our Mishnah where the get is possible, but yet if he went ahead and he gave that get that's possible, what impact would it have, which is called Reach HaGet, in terms of her ability and her permissibility to get married to a Kohen. Okay, then, so this is where we're going to stop on the bottom of Daf Chav Daled Amud Beis. And I'll take this opportunity to wish you a wonderful Shabbos. And Mirz Hashem, over Shabbos, we'll learn Chav Hey, and then we'll get together on Sunday for Chav Vav.